The email notification pinged at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was reviewing quarterly reports for Evergreen Digital Solutions when Maya, my receptionist, knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. Part confusion, part concern, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Sarah," she said, holding her tablet like it might explode, "you need to see this. It's about our office space." I looked up from the spreadsheet displaying our best revenue quarter yet, expecting another routine building maintenance notice, or maybe a fire drill announcement. Maya handed me the tablet, and there it was, glowing on the screen like a digital slap across the face. A professional real estate listing for Suite 1205 Meridian Business Center. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My office, my company's home for the past 5 years. Complete with interior photos that had clearly been taken without my knowledge, detailed square footage measurements, and a price that made my stomach drop. The listing agent's name at the bottom made everything click into place with sickening clarity. Jennifer Walsh, Rodriguez, and Associates Real Estate. The same Jennifer Walsh who had helped Marcus find his dream house 2 years ago, while our relationship was crumbling. The same Jennifer who had somehow become our building's new property manager 6 months ago. And now, apparently, the same Jennifer who thought she could sell my business out from under me. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, my mind racing through possibilities and implications. The photos were recent. I could tell because they showed the new conference table we'd installed just last month, and the motivational artwork Maya had convinced me to hang in the reception area. Someone had been in my office, documenting everything, preparing to dismantle the life I'd built here without so much as a conversation. Maya shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "Should I call the building management office?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd been with Evergreen Digital since the beginning, had watched me pour everything into growing this company, from a one-person operation in my Pearl District loft to a thriving consultancy with 12 employees and clients across the Pacific Northwest. She understood what this space meant to me, what losing it could do to everything we'd worked for. I set the tablet down carefully, my hands steadier than I felt. "Not yet," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Let me make some calls first. And Maya? Don't mention this to the rest of the team until we know more." She nodded and quietly closed the door behind her, leaving me alone with the devastating glow of that listing page. I picked up my phone and scrolled to David Kim's number. As my business partner and the closest thing I had to a voice of reason, David had talked me through every major decision since we'd formalized our partnership 3 years ago. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was him. "David," I said when he answered on the second ring, "we have a problem." 20 minutes later, David burst through my office door looking like he'd run the 6 blocks from his apartment. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he was slightly out of breath, which told me he'd taken my call as seriously as I'd hoped he would. "Show me," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I turned my laptop screen toward him and watched his face cycle through the same emotions I'd experienced. Confusion, disbelief, and then a slow-burning anger that made his jaw clench in a way I recognized from our most challenging client negotiations. "This is our office," he said, as if stating it aloud might somehow change the reality on the screen. "Complete with interior photos taken without our permission," I confirmed. "And listed by Jennifer Walsh." David's eyebrows shot up. "Marcus's Jennifer Walsh?" I nodded grimly. David had been there for the worst of the breakup 2 years ago. Had listened to me vent about how Marcus seemed to prioritize his real estate agent's advice over his fiancé's feelings? How Jennifer always seemed to find reasons why the houses I liked weren't quite right? How she'd somehow managed to position herself as the expert on Marcus's future in ways that increasingly excluded me from the conversation. "This can't be legal," David said, leaning back in the chair across from my desk. "We have a lease. A valid, multi-year lease with renewal options." I pulled up our lease agreement on my computer, scanning through the dense legal language we'd both read dozens of times over the years. That's what I thought too, but look at this clause, I said, pointing to a section buried in the middle of page 7. If the property owner decides to sell, they can terminate any lease with 90 days' notice, provided they offer the tenant first right of refusal at market value. David was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. So Jennifer thinks she can force us out by putting the space on the market? It's worse than that, I said, scrolling through more of the listing details. Look at the marketing description. Premium office space available for immediate occupancy. Current tenant lease expires soon, making this an excellent investment opportunity for owner-users or investors seeking steady rental income. Current tenant lease expires soon? David's voice rose slightly. Our lease doesn't expire for another 18 months. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Unless someone's planning to make it expire sooner. We spent the next hour researching property records, lease laws, and trying to understand how Jennifer Walsh had maneuvered herself into a position where she could potentially destroy everything I'd built. The deeper we dug, the more unsettling the picture became. Jennifer had been appointed as the new property manager for Meridian Business Center 6 months ago, when the previous management company had been replaced. The building owner, Robert Stevens, was a 72-year-old investor who owned 17 commercial properties. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Properties across Portland, and had recently been dealing with health issues that made him increasingly reliant on property managers to handle day-to-day operations. She's been planning this, I said, staring at the timeline we'd sketched out on my whiteboard. 6 months ago, she gets herself appointed as property manager. 3 months ago, she starts doing those quote-quote routine inspections that felt more thorough than necessary. Last month, she started asking detailed questions about our lease terms and expansion plans. And now this. David stood up and started pacing, which he only did when he was really worried. The question is why? What does she gain from forcing us out? I thought about Jennifer Walsh, about the perfectly styled blonde hair and designer suits that screamed success, about the way she'd always looked at me during those house hunting trips with Marcus like I was an obstacle to overcome, rather than a person with opinions and preferences. I remembered how she'd somehow always had a reason why my favorite properties weren't suitable, how she'd steered Marcus toward neighborhoods and price ranges that felt designed to exclude me from the conversation. Control, I said finally. Jennifer's entire identity is built around being the person who makes things happen, who knows the right people and can get the best deals. When Marcus and I broke up, she lost that influence over a significant client relationship. But now she's in a position to impact my business directly. That's personal vendetta territory, David said grimly, which makes her dangerous. I opened my laptop and started typing. I'm calling an emergency meeting with our attorney. We need to understand exactly what our rights are here, and what Jennifer can and can't do as property manager. But even as I scheduled the appointment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just office space. This felt like unfinished business from a relationship that had ended badly, like Jennifer was settling a score I hadn't even realized we were keeping. The irony wasn't lost on me that the office space Jennifer was trying to take away was the same space where I'd rebuilt my life after Marcus. This was where I'd channeled the pain of that failed relationship into something productive, where I'd proven to myself that I could create something meaningful and lasting without needing someone else's approval or support. And now the woman who had helped destroy my relationship was trying to destroy my business too. I looked around my office, taking in the carefully chosen artwork, the bookshelf filled with marketing and business strategy guides, the large window that overlooked downtown Portland's bustling streets. This wasn't just an office. It was the physical manifestation of every late night I'd spent building client relationships, every weekend I'd worked to meet impossible deadlines, every difficult conversation with employees and vendors and landlords that had taught me how to run a business. Jennifer Walsh thought she could list it for sale like any other property. She was about to learn that some things aren't for sale at any price. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. 3 clients called asking about the listing. Word is getting out. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The news was spreading, which meant I had a limited window to get ahead of this story before it became the narrative that defined my company's future. Clients would start questioning our stability. Employees would worry about job security. Competitors would circle like vultures, ready to pick up our contracts if we seemed vulnerable. But I'd been underestimated before. 2 years ago, Marcus had assumed I'd fall apart without him, that I'd struggle to manage the business pressure without his emotional support and financial backing. His assumption had been that I was the weaker partner, the one who needed taking care of, the one who would crumble under real adversity. He'd been wrong then, and Jennifer was wrong now. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in 6 months. Dr. Patricia Moore, the business mentor who had guided me through the worst period of the breakup and the early stages of rapid company growth. Patricia was the kind of woman who had built 3 successful companies, sold 2 of them, and now spent her time helping other entrepreneurs navigate the obstacles that could destroy promising businesses. "Patricia," I said when she answered, "I need your help. Someone's trying to force me out of my office space, and I think it's personal." "How personal?" Patricia asked, her voice immediately shifting into the focused tone I remembered from our most intense strategy sessions. "My ex-fiancé's real estate agent is now my property manager, and she just listed my office for sale without telling me." There was a brief pause. "That's not just personal, Sarah. That's war. And the first rule of business warfare is never let your enemy define the battlefield. How much time do we have?" I looked at the listing again, noting the "for immediate showing" notation at the bottom. "Not much. Then we'd better get started." Patricia's office overlooked the Willamette River from the 23rd floor of a glass tower that screamed corporate success. I'd been here dozens of times over the past few years, but today the familiar space felt different, more like a war room than a mentoring sanctuary. Patricia sat behind her mahogany desk, reading through printed copies of the lease agreement, property records, and Jennifer's real estate listing, with the methodical precision of someone who had survived 3 decades of business battles. "Tell me about Jennifer Walsh," Patricia said without looking up from the documents. "Not the professional version, the real person. What drives her?" I settled deeper into the leather chair across from her desk, trying to organize 2 years' worth of complicated history into something coherent. Jennifer's the kind of person who needs to be the smartest one in every room. When Marcus and I were house hunting, she never just showed us properties. She educated us about market trends, neighborhood demographics, investment potential. She positioned herself as indispensable. Patricia made a note in the margin of one of the documents. "Control through expertise. Classic power play. What else?" "She has this way of making you feel like you're lucky she's paying attention to you," I continued, remembering those weekend afternoons spent touring houses that never quite felt right. With Marcus, she was always subtly reinforcing that he was making smart decisions, that he had good instincts. With me, everything was a gentle correction or a suggestion for improvement. "She was separating you," Patricia observed, finally looking up. "Making Marcus feel confident, while making you feel uncertain. When a relationship is under stress, that kind of manipulation can be devastating." I nodded, thinking about how those house hunting sessions had gradually become a source of tension between Marcus and me. By the end, I dreaded those appointments. Jennifer would ask Marcus about his vision for our future, but when I contributed ideas, she'd find polite ways to explain why they weren't practical or financially sound. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me with the expression I'd learned meant she was assembling puzzle pieces in her mind. So Jennifer's relationship with Marcus was built on making him feel successful and decisive. When you two broke up, she lost a client and a source of validation. Now she's found a way to target you directly. "But why wait 2 years?" I asked. "If this was about revenge, why not strike sooner?" "Because 2 years ago, you were vulnerable," Patricia replied, tapping her pen against the desk. "A woman going through a difficult breakup, struggling to maintain her business, emotionally raw. There's no satisfaction in defeating someone who's already down. But now? Now you're successful. You've rebuilt stronger than before. Destroying you now proves something that destroying you then couldn't." The observation hit me like a cold wave. I thought about the past 6 months, how well Evergreen Digital had been performing, how our client roster had expanded, how confident I'd felt about the future. Jennifer had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when it would hurt the most. "She's been planning this since she became property manager," I said, the timeline becoming clearer. "She needed to be in a position of power over something I cared about." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Now you're thinking strategically. Jennifer didn't stumble into this opportunity. She created it. The question is, what's her end game? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the emails I'd received from the building management office over the past 6 months. Now that I was looking for patterns, they were everywhere. Jennifer had introduced herself as the new property manager with a professional but distant tone. She'd scheduled those routine inspections with minimal notice, always finding small issues that required follow-up visits. She'd asked detailed questions about our expansion plans, our employee count, our lease satisfaction. She's been building a case, I realized aloud. Every interaction was gathering information she could use to justify terminating our lease. What kind of case? Patricia asked. I scrolled through more emails, my stomach sinking as the pattern became undeniable. Overcrowding. She documented that we have 12 employees in a space designed for 10. Noise complaints from other tenants about our conference calls. Maintenance issues that she claimed were caused by, quote, excessive wear and tear. Multiple requests for lease modifications that she characterized as, quote, tenant instability. Patricia whistled low. She's thorough. And she's been playing a longer game than you realized. I set my phone down, feeling the weight of how completely I'd been outmaneuvered. Every time I thought I was being a responsible tenant by communicating openly about our needs, I was actually giving her ammunition. That's the insidious part about this kind of manipulation, Patricia said gently. It turns your strengths against you. Your transparency became her intelligence gathering. Your success became her justification for seeing you as a threat. The intercom on Patricia's desk buzzed, and her assistant's voice announced that our attorney, Michael Harrison, had arrived for the emergency consultation. Patricia had called him during our phone conversation, knowing that we'd need legal expertise to navigate whatever Jennifer had planned. Michael Harrison looked like Central Casting's idea of a successful lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit, confident handshake. But his reputation for protecting small businesses from predatory practices was what mattered. He'd reviewed our lease agreement during the drive over and had already started making notes. The good news, Michael said, settling into the chair beside mine, is that your lease is ironclad. Jennifer can't simply terminate it because she wants to sell the property. The bad news is that she doesn't need to terminate it to make your life extremely difficult. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've been researching Jennifer Walsh and Rodriguez and Associates. She's built a reputation for aggressive tactics, particularly in situations where she can leverage property management authority to influence real estate transactions. Quote, what kind of tactics? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Selective enforcement of building policies, strategic maintenance scheduling that disrupts business operations, rent increases justified by creative interpretations of lease language, Michael listed. She's also known for creating documentation that supports whatever narrative serves her clients' interests. Patricia leaned forward. You're saying she's done this before? 3 times in the past 2 years that I can document, Michael confirmed. All small businesses, all situations where the property manager had personal or professional reasons to want the tenant gone. In each case, the businesses either moved voluntarily or were forced out through lease violations that appeared legitimate on the surface. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened to those businesses? One relocated and recovered. One relocated and struggled for 18 months before closing. One fought the eviction, lost, and filed for bankruptcy 6 months later. The room fell silent as we absorbed the implications. Jennifer wasn't just targeting me personally. She was following a proven playbook for destroying businesses she viewed as obstacles. So what's our strategy? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Michael and Patricia exchanged a look that suggested they'd been thinking about this question since before I'd arrived. We need to understand what Jennifer wants, Patricia said carefully. If this is purely personal revenge, we're dealing with one set of challenges. If it's business motivated, we have different options. How do we find out? I asked. Michael smiled grimly. We make her an offer she can't refuse to explain. 2 hours later, I was back at Meridian Business Center, standing in the building's marble lobby, with a plan that felt both brilliant and terrifying. The strategy Patricia and Michael had developed was elegant in its simplicity. Force Jennifer to reveal her true motivations by creating a situation where she had to choose between professional gain and personal satisfaction. The elevator ride to the building management office on the 15th floor felt endless. I'd rehearsed my approach during the drive back from Patricia's office, but my heart was still pounding as I walked through the glass doors marked Meridian Property Management. The receptionist, a young woman with bright purple hair and multiple ear piercings, looked up from her computer with a friendly smile. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with Jennifer Walsh about my lease," I said, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. "I'm Sarah Chen from Evergreen Digital Solutions, Suite 1205. The receptionist's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Let me see if she's available." While I waited, I studied the office space that Jennifer had claimed as her professional domain. Everything was perfectly coordinated. White furniture, glass accessories, motivational posters with real estate themes. It looked like a showroom rather than a workplace, designed to impress visitors rather than facilitate actual work. "Ms. Chen?" Jennifer's voice came from behind me, smooth and professional with an undertone I couldn't quite identify. What a pleasant surprise. I turned to face the woman who had been orchestrating my professional destruction from the shadows. Jennifer looked exactly as I remembered. Blonde hair in a perfect bob, designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I was hoping we could discuss my lease situation," I said, following her gesture toward her private office. "I understand there might be some changes coming." Jennifer's office was even more pristine than the reception area, with not a single paper out of place on her glass desk. The walls were covered with real estate awards, photos of Jennifer at various industry events, and a prominent display case filled with closing gifts from grateful clients. "Please, sit," Jennifer said, settling behind her desk with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being in control. "I'm always happy to discuss tenant concerns." I sat in the chair across from her, noting how the positioning made me look up at her slightly, a subtle power play that felt intentional. "I received some concerning information today about my office space being listed for sale." Jennifer's expression didn't change, but I caught a brief flicker of something. Satisfaction? Maybe? Or anticipation? "Oh yes, the owner is exploring his options for the property. It's a routine part of portfolio management." "Without notifying the tenants first?" I asked, keeping my tone carefully neutral. "The lease agreement doesn't require advance notice for marketing activities," Jennifer replied smoothly. "Of course, any actual sale would involve proper legal procedures and tenant notifications." I nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. "I see. In that case, I'd like to submit a formal offer to purchase the space myself." This time, Jennifer's reaction was unmistakable. Her perfectly composed expression faltered for just a moment, revealing surprise and something that looked almost like disappointment. "You want to buy your office space?" she asked, her professional mask sliding back into place. "The building owner is looking to sell, and I'm looking to secure my company's long-term stability," I replied. "It seems like a perfect match." Jennifer was quiet for several seconds, and I could practically see her recalculating whatever strategy she'd been following. "Of course, I'd need to discuss any offers with Mr. Stevens. The property is being marketed at fair market value." "I understand," I said, pulling a folder from my bag. "I've had the space appraised independently, and I'm prepared to make a competitive offer. Above asking price, actually." I slid the folder across her desk, watching her face as she opened it. Inside were documents that Michael Harrison had helped me prepare: a formal purchase offer, proof of financing, and a letter of intent that exceeded the listed price by 15%. Jennifer scanned the documents with the practiced eye of someone who reads real estate contracts for a living. When she looked up, her expression had hardened almost imperceptibly. "This is quite generous," she said carefully, "though I should mention that the owner has received several other expressions of interest." "From whom?" I asked, though I was fairly certain I knew the answer. "I'm not at liberty to discuss other potential buyers," Jennifer replied, but her tone had shifted. The professional courtesy was still there, but underneath it was something colder, more calculating. "Of course," I said, standing up. "I understand you'll need time to review this with Mr. Stevens. How long should I expect the evaluation process to take?" Jennifer closed the folder and placed it precisely in the center of her desk. These things can be complicated. There are many factors to consider beyond just the purchase price. Such as, I asked, buyer qualifications, intended use of the property, alignment with the owner's long-term investment strategy. Jennifer listed. Mr. Stevens is very particular about who he sells to. I nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure he is. Well, I'll look forward to hearing back from you soon. As I turned to leave, Jennifer's voice stopped me at the door. Sarah? I looked back, noting that she dropped the formal Ms. Chen for the first time since I'd arrived. I hope you understand that business decisions aren't always personal, she said, her smile returning but feeling forced. Sometimes what seems like the obvious choice isn't actually the best choice for everyone involved. Absolutely, I replied. Though I've found that the best business decisions usually benefit everyone involved. When they don't, it makes you wonder what other factors might be influencing the decision-making process. I left Jennifer's office with my heart pounding and my mind racing. The meeting had confirmed everything Patricia and Michael had suspected. Jennifer wasn't interested in facilitating a sale to me, despite my offer being above market value and my qualifications being unquestionable. This wasn't about business. It was personal. Back in my office, I called Patricia immediately. She's not going to accept your offer, Patricia said after I'd described the meeting, which tells us everything we need to know about her motivations. So what's next? I asked. Now we document everything, Patricia replied. Every interaction, every decision, every conversation. Jennifer just showed her hand, and we're going to use that against her. I hung up the phone and looked around my office with new eyes. This space represented 5 years of building something meaningful, of proving that I could succeed on my own terms. Jennifer Walsh thought she could take that away from me, but she'd underestimated who she was dealing with. I'd rebuilt my life once after Marcus left. I was prepared to fight for it now. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of strategic planning and careful documentation. Maya helped me compile a complete record of every interaction with Jennifer since she'd become property manager. David worked on securing backup office locations, just in case we needed to relocate quickly. I spent hours on the phone with Michael Harrison, reviewing our legal options and building a case for selective enforcement and bad faith dealing. By the time the sun set over Portland's skyline, I had a clearer picture of what we were facing. Jennifer had been systematically building a case against us, while positioning herself to profit from our removal. She'd found a way to use her professional authority to settle a personal score, and she'd assumed I would go quietly rather than fight back. She was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, jolting me awake from the first decent sleep I'd managed since discovering the listing. Jennifer's voice was crisp and professional, but there was an edge underneath that made my stomach tighten. Sarah, I need you to come in for an emergency building inspection at 8 o'clock this morning. We've received complaints about code violations in your suite that require immediate attention. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. What kind of code violations? Fire safety concerns, primarily, Jennifer replied smoothly. Overcrowding issues, blocked emergency exits, improper storage of flammable materials. The city inspector will be here at 8:15, and I need to document the current state of your office beforehand. I glanced at my bedside clock, calculating how much time I had to prepare. Jennifer, I need more notice than an hour and 15 minutes for something this serious. Can we reschedule for this afternoon? I'm afraid not, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction creeping into her voice. The inspector's schedule is quite full, and these are safety issues that can't wait. I'm sure you understand that tenant safety is our highest priority. After she hung up, I sat in my empty loft apartment, staring at the city lights beginning to fade into dawn. This was it. The pressure point Patricia had warned me about. Jennifer was escalating her campaign, using official channels to create documented violations that would justify lease termination. I called David immediately, knowing he'd already be awake. He was one of those people who started every day with a 5-mile run, regardless of the weather or circumstances. Emergency inspection in an hour, I said without preamble when he answered. Jennifer's bringing a city inspector to document code violations. What violations? David asked, his breathing slightly labored from his run. Fire safety, overcrowding, blocked exits, I listed. All things that could be interpreted creatively if someone wanted to build a case. I'll be there in 30 minutes, David said. Don't go in alone. I spent the drive to the office mentally cataloging everything in our suite that could possibly be construed as a violation. Our conference room did seat 14 people around a table designed for 12. We had stored old marketing materials in boxes near the back emergency exit. Our coffee station included a small hot plate that employees used for lunch preparation. Under normal circumstances, these were minor issues that any reasonable property manager would address with a simple conversation. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Jennifer Walsh wasn't a reasonable property manager. David was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the grim expression I'd learned to associate with serious problems. I walked through the space already, he said, handing me a cup. Maya got here early and helped me clear anything that could be problematic. What did you find? I asked as we rode the elevator to the 12th floor. Nothing that violates actual fire code, David replied. But plenty that could be spun as violations by someone looking for problems. The question is, how detailed will this inspector be? We unlocked the office suite to find Maya already at her desk, looking uncharacteristically nervous. She'd been with us long enough to understand the stakes, and I could see the worry in her eyes as she looked up from her computer. I moved all the storage boxes away from the emergency exit, she reported quietly. And I counted the conference room chairs. We have exactly 10 now, with the extras stored in the supply closet. Thank you, I said, touched by her proactive thinking. How long have you been here? Since 6:30, Maya admitted. I couldn't sleep after David called me. This feels wrong, Sarah. The whole thing feels like a setup. Before I could respond, the elevator chimed in the hallway, and Jennifer's voice carried through our open door. Right this way, Inspector Rodriguez. The tenant reported concerns about their space configuration. I met David's eyes across the reception area. Tenant reported concerns? I mouthed silently. Jennifer swept into our office like she owned it, followed by a tired-looking man in his 50s carrying a clipboard and wearing a city inspector's badge. Her smile was bright and professional, but her eyes were scanning our space with the intensity of someone looking for ammunition. Sarah, David, I'd like you to meet Inspector Rodriguez from the Portland Fire Department, Jennifer said with exaggerated courtesy. He's here to help us address the safety concerns you brought to my attention. Inspector Rodriguez looked confused. I thought the property manager called in the complaint. Oh no, Jennifer said smoothly. The concerns were raised by the tenant. I'm just facilitating the inspection to ensure everyone's safety. I opened my mouth to correct her, but caught David's warning look. He was right. Contradicting Jennifer in front of the inspector would only make us look uncooperative. Inspector Rodriguez, I said instead. We appreciate you taking the time to review our space. We want to ensure we're in full compliance with all safety regulations. Inspector Rodriguez nodded and began his examination of the office. He was thorough but fair, measuring spaces, checking exit routes, examining our electrical setup and storage areas. Jennifer followed him closely, taking notes and occasionally pointing out details she thought he should examine more carefully. The conference room appears to be within occupancy limits, Inspector Rodriguez announced after measuring the space twice. Emergency exits are clear and properly marked. Electrical systems look up to code. Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. What about the storage situation? I've observed boxes and materials stored in various locations throughout the suite. Normal office storage, the inspector replied, making notes on his clipboard. Nothing that violates fire safety regulations. For the next 30 minutes, Jennifer found increasingly creative reasons for the inspector to examine different aspects of our office. She questioned our coffee station setup, our paper storage system, even the placement of our office plants. Each time, Inspector Rodriguez patiently examined whatever she pointed out and found it to be in compliance. Finally, Inspector Rodriguez completed his checklist and turned to face all of us. "This office space meets all fire safety requirements," he announced. "I don't see any violations or safety concerns that require immediate attention." Jennifer's professional composure cracked for just a moment, revealing a flash of frustration that she quickly covered with another bright smile. "Wonderful," she said. "I'm so glad we could resolve any concerns." "What concerns?" Inspector Rodriguez asked, now looking genuinely puzzled. "Ms. Walsh, your call this morning mentioned urgent safety violations that required immediate inspection. I don't see anything here that would qualify as urgent." Jennifer's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. "Sometimes initial reports can be overstated," she said carefully. "I believe in being proactive about tenant safety." Inspector Rodriguez nodded slowly, but I could see him reassessing the situation. "In the future, please make sure emergency inspections are truly necessary. We have limited resources for non-urgent situations." After the inspector left, Jennifer lingered in our reception area, her earlier friendliness replaced by something cooler and more calculating. "I'm glad we could clear up any confusion," she said, though her tone suggested anything but gladness. "There was no confusion on our end," I replied evenly. "We've always maintained our space in full compliance with building regulations." "Of course," Jennifer said, making a note in her tablet. "Though I should mention that the building owner is still evaluating multiple offers for this property. The inspection today will be part of the overall assessment." David stepped forward slightly. "Assessment of what, exactly?" "Tenant reliability, property maintenance, overall desirability for potential buyers," Jennifer listed smoothly. "Prospective purchasers want to know they're acquiring stable, well-managed spaces." I felt a cold understanding wash over me. "You're telling potential buyers that we're problem tenants." "I'm providing accurate information about the property and its current occupancy situation," Jennifer corrected. "If that information influences their purchasing decisions, that's simply market forces at work." The casual way she said it, like destroying my business reputation was just another day at the office, made my blood pressure spike. But I forced myself to maintain the same professional tone she was using. "I see," I said calmly. "In that case, I assume you'll also be providing accurate information about our perfect payment history, our lease compliance record, and the inspector's findings today." Jennifer's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. All relevant information will be shared with interested parties." After she left, Maya, David, and I stood in the reception area, processing what had just happened. The silence stretched until Maya finally spoke up. "She's going to keep doing this, isn't she?" Maya asked quietly. "Finding new ways to make us look bad until someone believes her." David nodded grimly. "She's playing a long game. Even if she can't find real violations, she can create the appearance of problems through repeated inspections and complaints." I pulled out my phone and started typing notes about the morning's events. "Every interaction gets documented," I said. "Every false claim, every misrepresentation, every attempt to manufacture problems where none exist." But even as I typed, I could feel the weight of what we were up against. Jennifer had institutional authority, professional credentials, and a network of industry relationships that gave her credibility. I had the truth on my side, but in a battle where perception mattered as much as reality, truth wasn't always enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "How did the inspection go?" I called her instead of texting back, needing to hear a voice that understood the bigger picture. "She falsely claimed I had requested the inspection," I reported. "Told the inspector I had reported safety concerns, then spent 30 minutes trying to convince him to find violations that didn't exist." "Documented the whole thing?" Patricia asked. "Every word," I confirmed. "David and Maya witnessed everything." "Good," Patricia said. "She's getting desperate, which means we're getting closer to forcing her hand. Desperate people make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" I asked. "The kind that reveal their true motivations," Patricia replied. "Jennifer's been careful to maintain plausible deniability, but she's starting to overreach. Keep pushing back professionally and documenting everything. She'll eventually cross a line she can't uncross." That afternoon, I received an email that made my hands shake as I read it. The subject line was innocuous enough, property showing schedule. But the content was devastating. Jennifer was scheduling tours of my office space for potential buyers. 5 different appointments over the next 2 weeks, during normal business hours, with minimal notice to me as the current tenant. The email was professionally worded and technically compliant, with lease terms that required reasonable access for showings, but the timing and frequency were clearly designed to disrupt our operations. I forwarded the email to David and Michael Harrison, then called an emergency team meeting. Our 12 employees gathered in the conference room that had been measured so carefully that morning, and I could see the anxiety on their faces as I explained the situation. I want to be completely transparent with all of you, I began. Someone is trying to force us out of this office space, and they're using increasingly aggressive tactics to do it. We're fighting back through legal channels, but I need you to know what's happening. Elena Vasquez, our senior graphic designer, raised her hand tentatively. Are we going to lose our jobs? Not if I can help it, I said firmly. We have backup plans in place, and our business is strong. This is about real estate politics, not our company's performance. What do you need from us? Asked James Park, our lead developer. Professionalism during the office showings, I replied. Don't be hostile to potential buyers, but don't go out of your way to make their job easier either. Document any disruptions to your work, and let me know immediately if anyone asks inappropriate questions about our business operations. Sarah Kim, our newest hire, looked confused. Why would someone want to force us out if we're good tenants? I hesitated, unsure how much personal history to share with the team. Sometimes business decisions aren't purely business, I said carefully. There are personal elements to this situation that are influencing what should be straightforward property management. After the meeting, Maya approached my office with a concerned expression. Sarah, I need to tell you something, she said, closing the door behind her. Jennifer called me yesterday afternoon, after you left for your meeting with Patricia. I felt my stomach drop. What did she want? She said she was conducting a tenant satisfaction survey and asked if I was happy working here. Maya explained. But the questions were weird. She asked about employee turnover, whether people seemed stressed, if there were frequent client complaints, whether the office environment felt stable. What did you tell her? I asked. The truth, Maya said, that this is the best job I've ever had, that you're a great boss, that our clients love us. But Sarah, she kept pushing for negative information. It felt like she was fishing for something specific. I made another note in my growing file of Jennifer's inappropriate actions. Did she record the conversation? She said she was taking notes for building management purposes, Maya replied. But it felt more like she was building a case against us. That evening, I stayed late in the office, reviewing lease documents and researching tenant rights. The building was quiet except for the occasional sound of the elevator or distant voices from the law firm that worked late hours 3 floors below us. I was deep in legal research when I heard voices in the hallway outside our suite. Through the frosted glass of our entrance, I could see shadows moving back and forth, and I recognized Jennifer's voice giving what sounded like a tour. As you can see, this space has been heavily utilized, Jennifer was saying. The current tenant has been here for several years, and there's significant wear and tear that would need to be addressed. I moved closer to the door, staying out of sight, but positioning myself where I could hear clearly. The tenant has also been challenging to work with, Jennifer continued. Multiple requests for lease modifications, complaints about building policies, resistance to routine inspections. Not the kind of stable occupancy most investors prefer. A male voice responded. What about their payment history? Technically current, Jennifer replied in a tone that suggested this was somehow inadequate. But there have been complications. I felt my face flush with anger. Jennifer was outright lying to potential buyers, mischaracterizing our excellent relationship with building management and perfect payment record. This went beyond aggressive sales tactics into deliberate misrepresentation. I quietly opened my office door and activated the voice recording app on my phone, holding it near the gap between the door and frame. If Jennifer was going to lie about us to potential buyers, I was going to document every word. The space would be much more attractive with a different tenant, Jennifer was saying. Someone more focused on maintaining the property value and less concerned with pushing boundaries. Is the current lease long-term? The potential buyer asked. 18 months remaining, Jennifer replied, but there are several clauses that could allow for earlier termination if the right circumstances arise. I had heard enough. I stepped out of our office suite and into the hallway, where Jennifer was leading a well-dressed couple through what was clearly a sales presentation focused on getting rid of us. Good evening, I said pleasantly, extending my hand to the potential buyers. I'm Sarah Chen, the current tenant. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Jennifer's face went white, then red, as she realized I'd been listening to her misrepresentations. Sarah, she said with forced brightness, I didn't realize you were still here. I often work late, I replied, still addressing the potential buyers. I hope Jennifer has given you accurate information about our tenancy. We've been model tenants for 5 years, with perfect payment history and excellent relationships with building management. The male buyer looked confused, glancing between Jennifer and me. Ms. Walsh was just explaining some of the challenges with the current lease situation. What kind of challenges? I asked innocently, looking directly at Jennifer. I wasn't aware of any challenges. Jennifer's professional composure was cracking visibly. We should continue this conversation in my office, she said to the buyers, clearly trying to end the encounter. Actually, the female buyer said, I'd like to hear more about the tenant's perspective. If we're going to purchase the property, we need accurate information about the rental situation. I smiled warmly. Of course. We've been very happy here. Our business has grown significantly over the past 5 years, and we've consistently maintained the space in excellent condition. We've never had any disputes with management, and we've always been responsive to any building requests or concerns. Jennifer's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles in her neck standing out. Perhaps we should schedule a more formal meeting to discuss the property details, she said stiffly. That's a good idea, I agreed. I'd be happy to provide references from previous property managers, documentation of our maintenance record, and testimony about our experience as tenants. Transparency is always the best policy in real estate transactions. The buyers exchanged glances, clearly picking up on the tension between Jennifer and me. We'll be in touch, the male buyer said diplomatically, and they followed Jennifer toward the elevator with considerably less enthusiasm than they'd shown during the tour. After they left, I stood alone in the hallway, heart pounding with adrenaline and satisfaction. Jennifer had just been caught red-handed lying to potential buyers, and I had witnesses and a recording to prove it. My phone rang as I was locking up the office. It was Patricia. How are you holding up? She asked without preamble. Better than Jennifer, I think, I replied and told her about the evening's encounter. Patricia was quiet for a moment after I finished. She's escalating because she's running out of time, she said finally. The building owner is probably getting pressure to make a decision about the sale, and Jennifer needs to close this deal before her lies catch up with her. What do you think happens next? I asked. She makes a mistake big enough that we can use it to destroy her credibility completely, Patricia replied. The question is, are you ready for that fight? I looked back at the darkened office that represented everything I'd built over the past 5 years. Everything Jennifer was trying to take away from me, and felt a cold determination settle in my chest. I'm ready, I said. The turning point came 3 days later when I received a call that changed everything. It was 2:30 p.m. on a Monday, and I was reviewing quarterly projections with David when Maya knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before. Part excitement, part disbelief. Sarah, she said, holding her phone like it contained precious cargo. Robert Stevens is on line 1. The building owner. He wants to speak with you directly. I exchanged glances with David, who raised his eyebrows in surprise. In 5 years of tenancy, I'd never spoken directly with Stevens. All communication had gone through property management companies. First the previous firm, then Jennifer's operation. Mr. Stevens, I said, picking up the phone with my heart racing. This is Sarah Chen. How can I help you? His voice was gravelly but warm, with the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned English as a second language decades ago. Miss Chen, I apologize for calling without notice, but I felt we needed to speak directly. I've been hearing conflicting information about your tenancy, and I prefer to get facts from the source. I gripped the phone tighter, sensing an opportunity but unsure how to navigate it. I'm happy to discuss anything you'd like to know about our lease or our business. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, Stevens replied. Ms. Walsh has been telling me that you're an unreliable tenant with multiple code violations and a history of late payments. But when I reviewed the actual records this morning, I found perfect payment history and clean inspection reports. I'm confused about this discrepancy. My pulse quickened. This was the opening I'd been waiting for, but I knew I had to handle it carefully. Mr. Stevens, I'd be happy to provide you with documentation of our tenancy history. We've worked very hard to be responsible tenants and good business neighbors. I would appreciate that, Stevens said. But first, can you help me understand why Ms. Walsh would misrepresent your tenancy status? She's been very insistent that selling the property quickly is in my best interest because of tenant problems. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next could determine the outcome of this entire situation. Mr. Stevens, I believe Ms. Walsh has personal motivations that may be influencing her professional recommendations. I have documentation of several interactions that suggest her assessment of our tenancy isn't based purely on business factors. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Personal motivations? Yes, sir. Ms. Walsh was the real estate agent for my former fiancé, and our relationship ended badly 2 years ago. Since she became your property manager, she's been systematically building a case against us that doesn't match the actual facts of our tenancy. Another pause, longer this time. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Chen. I understand that, and I don't make it lightly, I replied. I have recordings, emails, and witness statements that document a pattern of misrepresentation and harassment that goes beyond normal property management activities. I see, Stevens said quietly. Ms. Chen, would you be available to meet with me tomorrow morning? I think it's time I got the full story from all parties involved. After I hung up, David was staring at me with wide eyes. The building owner called you directly? Jennifer's been lying to him about us, I said, feeling a mixture of vindication and apprehension. He found out our payment history doesn't match what she told him, and now he wants to hear our side. David leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. This could be it, Sarah. If Stevens realizes Jennifer's been manipulating him for personal reasons, he could fire her and cancel the sale entirely. I nodded, but I also felt the weight of what was coming. Or Jennifer could convince him that I'm lying to protect myself. This meeting could go either way. That evening, I spent hours preparing for what might be the most important business meeting of my career. I organized every piece of documentation we had. Lease agreements, payment records, inspection reports, email exchanges, voice recordings, and witness statements from Maya and David. I created a timeline that showed the pattern of Jennifer's escalating harassment, cross-referenced with her appointment as property manager. But more than the documentation, I knew I needed to present the story in a way that helped Stevens understand not just what had happened, but why it mattered for his business interests. I called Patricia for advice on how to handle the meeting. Remember that Stevens is a businessman first, Patricia counseled. He doesn't care about your personal drama with Jennifer. What he cares about is whether his property manager is making decisions that serve his interests or her own. How do I prove that without sounding vindictive? I asked. Focus on the business impact, Patricia replied. Show him how Jennifer's actions have actually hurt his property value and rental income potential. She's been actively discouraging qualified buyers and spreading negative information about a stable, profitable tenant. That's bad business, regardless of her motivations. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Stevens' private office in a restored Victorian house in the Pearl District. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio that contained 5 years' worth of documentation about our tenancy and Jennifer's recent behavior. Robert Stevens was in his mid-70s, with silver hair and the careful movements of someone managing age gracefully. His office was old-school elegant. Dark wood, leather-bound books, oil paintings of Pacific Northwest landscapes. He greeted me with a firm handshake and offered coffee, which I accepted gratefully. Ms. Chen, he began once we were seated across from each other at a small conference table. I've been in real estate for 45 years, and I've learned that when the facts don't match the story, there's usually something important being left out. I opened my portfolio and placed a summary document in front of him. Mr. Stevens, I've prepared a complete record of our tenancy, including payment history, lease compliance, and communication records. I think you'll find that our actual track record doesn't match what you've been told. Stevens put on reading glasses and began examining the documents. His expression was neutral, but I could see him making mental notes as he reviewed payment dates, inspection reports, and correspondence with previous property managers. Perfect payment history, he murmured after several minutes. No late fees, no disputes, no maintenance issues beyond normal wear and tear. He looked up at me. This doesn't match what Ms. Walsh has been telling me. No, sir, it doesn't, I agreed. And I believe I know why. I pulled out the timeline I'd created, showing Jennifer's appointment as property manager alongside the escalation in problematic interactions. Ms. Walsh became involved in my personal life 2 years ago when she was helping my fiancé buy a house. Our relationship ended badly, and I believe she saw an opportunity for retaliation when she became your property manager. Stephen studied the timeline, occasionally referring back to the other documents. You're saying she's been deliberately undermining your tenancy for personal reasons? I'm saying that her recommendations to you don't serve your business interests, I replied carefully. She's been telling potential buyers that we're problem tenants, which reduces the property's value. She's been creating unnecessary inspections and paperwork that waste resources. And she's been pushing for a quick sale at below market value, which costs you money. I pulled out the recording I'd made of Jennifer lying to potential buyers. This is from last week, when she was giving a tour to prospective purchasers. Stevens listened to Jennifer's voice describing us as difficult tenants with payment problems and lease violations, then looked at the documentation showing our perfect record. His expression hardened. She told these buyers that you were behind on rent? Yes, sir, even though we've never been late with a payment in 5 years. Stevens was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the documents again. Miss Chen, what is it that you want from this meeting? I had prepared for this question, knowing it was the most important one I'd face. I want to continue being your tenant, Mr. Stevens. We love this space, we've been profitable there, and we want to sign a long-term lease that gives us stability and gives you guaranteed income. I believe that serves both our interests better than a quick sale to unknown buyers. Even after everything that's happened, property managers can be replaced, I said simply. Good tenant relationships are harder to find. Stevens leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression of someone making a significant decision. Ms. Chen, I'm going to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. I nodded, bracing myself. If I fire Ms. Walsh and keep you as a tenant, are you going to cause problems for whoever replaces her? Are you going to use this situation as leverage for special treatment or below market rent? I met his eyes directly. Mr. Stevens, I've never asked for special treatment in 5 years of tenancy. I pay market rate, I maintain the space professionally, and I communicate respectfully with building management. That won't change regardless of who you hire as property manager. Stevens smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The meeting lasted another hour as we discussed lease terms, property management concerns, and the future of the building. By the time I left, Stevens had agreed to terminate Jennifer's contract as property manager and offer us a 5-year lease extension at current market rates. But the real satisfaction came 3 hours later, when Jennifer called my office in a rage. You went behind my back to the building owner, she accused without preamble. That's completely unprofessional and probably illegal. Actually, Mr. Stevens called me, I replied calmly. He had questions about discrepancies between your reports and our actual tenancy record. I don't know what lies you told him, but you've made a serious mistake, Jennifer snarled, her professional facade finally cracking completely. You have no idea who you're dealing with or what I can do to your business. I had been recording the call from the moment I recognized her voice, knowing that Jennifer's anger might finally push her to reveal her true motivations. What exactly are you threatening to do to my business? I asked. I have connections throughout this industry, Jennifer replied. I can make sure you never get favorable lease terms anywhere in this city. I can destroy your reputation, with every property management company in Portland. Because I exposed your lies to Mr. Stevens? Because you cost me a significant commission and damaged my professional reputation, Jennifer shot back. That sale would have been worth 6 figures to me, and you ruined it with your petty revenge fantasies. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. Jennifer had been pushing for a quick sale not because it served Stevens' interests, but because she wanted the commission. Her campaign against us had been designed to justify selling the property at below market value to buyers who wouldn't ask too many questions. So this was never about property management, I said. It was about forcing a sale that would benefit you financially. Jennifer realized her mistake immediately. That's not what I said. I have a recording of exactly what you said, I replied. Including your threat to use your industry connections to damage my business for personal reasons. The line went quiet for several seconds. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. You're making a mistake, Sarah. This isn't over. You're right, I agreed. It's not over. Mr. Stevens will be very interested to hear about your threat to use your professional position for personal retaliation. I imagine the Real Estate Licensing Board will be interested too. Jennifer hung up without another word. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my office, my permanently secure office, reviewing the signed 5-year lease extension, when Maya brought me a small gift box with a note from Patricia. Inside was a silver paperweight engraved with a quote, "The best revenge is massive success." The note read, "For someone who chose to build rather than destroy. Proud of you. Patricia." David knocked on my doorframe, grinning broadly. "Jennifer's gone," he announced. "Tony from building maintenance just told me she cleared out her office this morning. Stevens hired a new property management company, and they start Monday." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a satisfaction deeper than simple victory. Any word on what happened to her real estate license? Let's just say that threatening to abuse professional connections for personal revenge doesn't look good on a licensing board review, David replied. Especially when it's documented and witnessed. That afternoon, I walked through the office space that had become the symbol of everything I'd fought to protect. Our 12 employees were busy with client projects. Maya was scheduling meetings for the next quarter, and the conference room was booked solid with presentations for new business prospects. This space represented more than just square footage or monthly rent payments. It was proof that I could build something lasting, something valuable, something worth defending. Jennifer Walsh had tried to take that away from me, but she'd underestimated the strength that comes from knowing your own worth. 6 months later, Evergreen Digital Solutions had grown to 18 employees and expanded into the adjacent suite. Our new property manager, Maria Santos, was professional, fair, and focused on building positive tenant relationships rather than manufacturing conflicts. I rarely thought about Jennifer anymore, except when someone asked me about the importance of documenting everything in business relationships. She had taught me that lesson more thoroughly than any business school course ever could. But the most important thing I learned wasn't about business, it was about resilience. When someone tries to destroy what you've built, the way you respond defines not just the outcome of that particular fight, but who you become as a person. I chose to fight with facts rather than emotions, with strategy rather than revenge, with determination rather than desperation. And in the end, that choice didn't just save my business. It made me stronger, smarter, and more confident in my ability to handle whatever challenges might come next. The building owner who took the time to verify the facts rather than believing convenient lies. The mentor who taught me to think strategically about conflict. The business partner who stood by me when things got difficult. The employees who trusted me to protect what we'd built together. Those relationships, forged and tested under pressure, turned out to be more valuable than any office space could ever be. One evening, as I was locking up after a particularly successful day, I found myself thinking about that first phone call from Jennifer, the one that had seemed like such a devastating attack on everything I'd worked for. At the time, it had felt like the worst thing that could happen to my business. In retrospect, it might have been the best thing. It forced me to document and defend the value I'd created, to build stronger relationships with everyone who mattered, and to prove to myself that I could handle anything that came my way. Jennifer Walsh had intended to destroy me, but she'd actually made me stronger. And that was a kind of justice that felt better than any revenge could have. The next morning brought news that felt like the final chapter of a story that had consumed months of my life. Maya handed me a newspaper clipping from the Portland Business Journal with a headline that made me smile. Local property management firm wins ethics award for tenant relations excellence. The article featured a photo of Maria Santos accepting an award on behalf of the company that now managed our building. The quote that caught my attention was from Robert Stevens. The best property managers understand that their job is to build value for both owners and tenants. When personal agendas interfere with that mission, everyone loses. It was his way of saying that he'd learned from the Jennifer Walsh experience, and he was committed to ensuring it never happened again. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Marcus. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations." The message was even simpler: "Heard about your business expansion. You always were stronger than I gave you credit for." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations belong in the past, and some victories are worth more when you don't need anyone else to acknowledge them. David found me in my office later that day, staring out the window at the Portland skyline. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how different things could have been," I said. "If I'd given up when Jennifer started her campaign, if I'd moved out quietly, if I'd let her win." "But you didn't," David pointed out. "You fought back, and you won." I shook my head. It wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to let someone else write my story. That evening, I attended the grand opening of a small business incubator that Evergreen Digital Solutions had helped launch. It was housed in a renovated warehouse in Southeast Portland, and it reminded me of our own early days. Entrepreneurs with big dreams and limited resources, working late into the night to build something meaningful. I talked with several of the startups about their challenges, their fears, their hopes for the future. One young woman named Catalyst was worried about a landlord who seemed to be looking for reasons to terminate her lease. "Document everything," I advised her. "Every interaction, every payment, every communication. And remember that the people who try to tear you down are usually threatened by what you're building." She nodded earnestly, taking notes on her phone. "How do you know when to fight and when to walk away?" I thought about that question as I drove home through the city streets where I'd built my life and my business. "You fight when what you're protecting is worth more than what you'll lose in the battle," I said finally. "And you walk away when holding on costs more than letting go." But the truth was more complicated than that simple answer. Sometimes you fight not because you're sure you'll win, but because losing while fighting feels better than losing while hiding. Sometimes you stand your ground, not because the ground is particularly valuable, but because you refuse to be moved by people who have no right to move you. Jennifer Walsh had tried to move me, and she'd failed. Not because I was stronger than her, but because I was more committed to my own story than she was to rewriting it. 3 years later, Evergreen Digital Solutions occupied an entire floor of the Meridian Business Center. We'd become the anchor tenant that building owners dream about: stable, growing, professional, and profitable. Robert Stevens had offered to sell us the entire building at a favorable price, though we'd decided to remain tenants for now. Sometimes I walked past the office that used to house Jennifer's property management operation. It was now occupied by a nonprofit that helps small businesses navigate regulatory challenges. The irony wasn't lost on me, but mostly, I thought about the future rather than the past. About the clients we'd serve, the employees we'd hire, the problems we'd solve, the value we'd create. About the young entrepreneurs I met, who reminded me that every business worth building faces people who want to tear it down. The difference between success and failure often comes down to a simple choice. Do you let other people define your limits, or do you define them yourself? I'd chosen to define my own limits, and that choice had made all the difference. The earthquake that would reshape everything started with a single phone call on a rain-soaked Thursday morning in November. I was reviewing client proposals when Maya rushed into my office, her face pale with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Sarah, you need to take this call immediately," she said, holding the phone like it contained explosive news. "It's Robert Stevens' attorney, and he says it's urgent regarding Jennifer Walsh." My stomach dropped as I took the phone, wondering what new crisis Jennifer had manufactured. But the voice on the other end belonged to Thomas Brennan. a litigation attorney whose reputation preceded him throughout Portland's business community. Ms. Chen, I represent Robert Stevens in a matter that directly concerns your tenancy at Meridian Business Center. We need to meet today if possible. There have been developments regarding Ms. Walsh that require immediate attention. 2 hours later, I sat in Brennan's downtown office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling law books and the kind of mahogany furniture that whispered old money and serious consequences. Stevens was there too, looking older and more tired than when I'd met with him 6 months earlier. Ms. Chen, Brennan began, sliding a thick folder across the polished conference table. We've discovered that Jennifer Walsh has been engaged in systematic fraud involving multiple properties in Mr. Stevens's portfolio. Your situation was just the beginning. I opened the folder to find documents that made my blood run cold. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers from property accounts. Forged inspection reports used to justify lease terminations. Email chains revealing a network of collaborators who helped Walsh manufacture violations and expedite sales for inflated commissions. She's been doing this to other tenants? I asked, though the evidence was spread out in front of me. Stevens nodded grimly. 7 properties over 18 months. Small businesses mostly. Companies that couldn't afford extended legal battles, or didn't have the resources to fight back effectively. Brennan pulled out a specific set of documents. The pattern was always the same. Walsh would identify stable tenants with profitable businesses, then systematically build cases for lease violations or property sales that would force them out. She had relationships with inspectors who would find creative interpretations of building codes, buyers who would purchase properties quickly without thorough due diligence, and other property managers who would provide negative references. I felt sick as I realized how close I'd come to becoming another casualty in Jennifer's elaborate scheme. What stopped her? You did, Stevens said simply. When you fought back and documented everything, it gave us the first comprehensive record of her methods. We were able to use your evidence to investigate the other properties and uncover the full scope of the fraud. Brennan leaned forward. Ms. Chen, we need you to testify in the criminal case against Walsh. Your documentation and recordings are crucial evidence, but we also need your first-hand account of her methods and motivations. The weight of what they were asking hit me immediately. Testifying in a criminal case would mean reliving the entire nightmare, exposing my personal history with Marcus and Jennifer to public scrutiny, and potentially making myself a target for retaliation from Jennifer's network of collaborators. But I thought about the other business owners who hadn't been as lucky as me, who'd lost their life's work because they couldn't fight back against Jennifer's systematic abuse of power. What happened to the other businesses? I asked. Stevens' expression darkened. 3 closed permanently. 2 are still struggling to recover from forced relocations. 1 owner filed for personal bankruptcy after fighting an eviction that was based entirely on fabricated violations. I closed my eyes, imagining myself in their position. If I hadn't had Patricia's guidance, David's support, and the resources to document Jennifer's behavior, Evergreen Digital Solutions could have been destroyed just as easily. I'll testify, I said firmly. Whatever you need. The criminal trial of Jennifer Walsh began 4 months later and dominated Portland's business news for weeks. The courtroom was packed with journalists, other property managers, small business owners, and real estate professionals who wanted to see how the case would unfold. I testified on the 3rd day, walking through the timeline of Jennifer's harassment campaign with the prosecutor's guidance. The defense attorney tried to characterize my testimony as the vindictive accusations of a woman seeking revenge for a failed relationship. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings I'd made of Jennifer lying to potential buyers, threatening to destroy my business, and admitting her financial motivations were played for the jury. The fake inspection reports, the misleading communications to Stevens, the systematic documentation of non-existent violations, all of it painted a picture of someone who had weaponized her professional authority for personal and financial gain. But the most devastating testimony came from Maria Santos, the property manager who had replaced Jennifer. She testified about finding falsified documents in Jennifer's files, discovering bank accounts that had been used to funnel kickbacks from expedited sales, and uncovering evidence that Jennifer had been selling tenant information to competitors. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Jennifer was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of fiduciary duty. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the businesses she'd damaged. More importantly, for the broader business community, the case led to sweeping reforms in property management regulations and tenant protection laws throughout Oregon. But for me, the real resolution came in the months following the trial, as I watched the ripple effects of standing up to abuse of power. 6 months after Jennifer's conviction, I received a call from Elena Rodriguez, one of the business owners whose company had been destroyed by Jennifer's fraud. She was starting over with a new venture and wanted to lease space in our building. "I heard about how you fought back," she said during our coffee meeting in the lobby of Meridian Business Center. "When everything happened to my business, I thought I was alone. I thought I'd somehow failed as an entrepreneur. Learning that it was part of a deliberate scheme, it's given me the confidence to try again." Elena's new company, a digital marketing firm specializing in helping small businesses recover from setbacks, became one of our neighbors on the 12th floor. Her success felt like validation that fighting Jennifer had been about more than just protecting my own business. But the most profound change was in how I approached business relationships going forward. The experience had taught me that success wasn't just about building something valuable. It was about developing the courage and systems to protect what you'd built. I started mentoring other small business owners, sharing the documentation methods and strategic thinking that had saved Evergreen Digital Solutions. I spoke at business conferences about recognizing and responding to predatory practices in commercial real estate. I worked with the Small Business Administration to develop resources for entrepreneurs facing property management disputes. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jennifer's attempt to destroy my business had actually expanded it in ways I never could have imagined. The publicity from the trial brought new clients who specifically wanted to work with a company that had demonstrated resilience under pressure. Our reputation for integrity and strategic thinking opened doors to opportunities I hadn't known existed. 2 years after the trial, Evergreen Digital Solutions had grown to 35 employees and occupied 2 full floors of Meridian Business Center. We'd opened a second office in Seattle and were considering expansion into California. But growth wasn't the only measure of success that mattered to me. I kept a framed photo on my desk from the day we'd moved into our expanded space. It showed our entire team celebrating in the conference room where Jennifer had once tried to find code violations. Maya was cutting a cake shaped like our company logo while David made a toast about persistence paying off. Looking at that photo reminded me that business success meant nothing if you couldn't share it with people who mattered. The team that had stood by me during the darkest period of Jennifer's campaign had become more than employees. They were partners in building something lasting and meaningful. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 3 years after Jennifer's conviction, when I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Marcus, written on his personal letterhead from Rodriguez and Associates Real Estate. The letter was longer than any communication we'd had since our relationship ended, and it was clearly something he'd struggled to write. He acknowledged that he'd been aware of Jennifer's unprofessional behavior during our house hunting process but had chosen to ignore it because she was bringing him significant business. He admitted that he'd failed to speak up when he should have, and that his silence had enabled Jennifer's later abuse of power. But the part of the letter that stuck with me was his observation about how the experience had changed both of us. He wrote that watching the trial had forced him to confront how his own ambition had blinded him to the harm his business partner was causing others. He had since ended his professional relationship with Jennifer and had implemented new ethical guidelines in his real estate practice. I never responded to Marcus's letter, but I kept it as a reminder that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that force other people to examine their own behavior and make better choices going forward. 5 years after Jennifer first listed my office space for sale without permission, I stood in the same reception area where Maya had first shown me that devastating real estate listing. But now the space looked completely different, expanded, modernized, filled with the energy of a thriving business that had not just survived its greatest challenge, but had been strengthened by it. Robert Stevens had offered to sell me the entire building at a significant discount, citing my role in exposing the fraud that had been costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue and legal fees. I'd accepted the offer, making Evergreen Digital Solutions not just a tenant, but a property owner. The transition from tenant to landlord had taught me new lessons about the responsibility that comes with controlling other people's business environments. I'd hired Maria Santos as our property manager, And together we'd develop tenant relations policies that prioritized transparency, fairness, and mutual respect. Our building had become a model for ethical property management, attracting businesses that valued stability and integrity over flashy amenities or below-market rent. The waiting list for space in our building included companies from across the Pacific Northwest who wanted to be part of an environment where success was built on solid foundations rather than exploitation of others. But the most meaningful change was in my own understanding of what success actually meant. For years, I'd defined success in terms of revenue growth, client acquisition, and competitive positioning. Those metrics mattered, but they weren't enough. Real success meant building something that could withstand attacks from people who wanted to destroy it. It meant creating value that benefited not just yourself, but everyone around you. It meant having the courage to fight for what was right, even when the outcome was uncertain. Jennifer Walsh had tried to teach me a different lesson. That power came from being willing to crush others to achieve your goals. That business was fundamentally about taking rather than creating. That survival required adopting the same ruthless methods used by people who saw you as a threat. I had chosen to learn a different lesson entirely. The morning I signed the papers to purchase Meridian Business Center, I walked through every floor of the building, thinking about the businesses housed there and the people who depended on them for their livelihoods. A tech startup run by two recent college graduates who reminded me of my younger self. A consulting firm started by a woman who'd left corporate America to build something of her own. A nonprofit that provided financial literacy training to underserved communities. Each of these businesses represented someone's dream, someone's willingness to take risks and work harder than they'd ever worked before. As their landlord, I had the power to support those dreams, or to make them more difficult to achieve. The responsibility felt enormous, but it also felt like the natural evolution of everything I'd learned from fighting Jennifer Walsh. That afternoon, I called Patricia to share the news about purchasing the building. She'd been following my journey since that first panicked phone call about the mysterious real estate listing, and her guidance had been instrumental in every major decision along the way. "I'm proud of you," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "But I'm not surprised. You learned early that the best way to protect yourself from predatory behavior is to get into a position where you can protect others too." Her observation crystallized something I'd been thinking about but hadn't quite articulated. My battle with Jennifer hadn't just been about saving my business. It had been about refusing to accept a world where people with authority could abuse that authority without consequences. By fighting back, documenting everything, and ultimately testifying in her criminal trial, I'd helped create a precedent that made it harder for other Jennifer Walshes to destroy small businesses with impunity. But more than that, I'd proven to myself that integrity and strategic thinking could triumph over manipulation and abuse of power. That lesson had value far beyond any individual business success. 6 months after purchasing the building, I established the Meridian Business Foundation, a nonprofit that provided legal resources and strategic support to small businesses facing predatory practices from landlords, vendors, or competitors. The foundation was funded through a percentage of the building's rental income, creating a sustainable way to help other entrepreneurs avoid the nightmare I'd experienced. The foundation's first case involved a restaurant owner whose landlord was trying to force him out through selective enforcement of lease terms that other tenants routinely violated. The pattern was familiar: manufactured violations, impossible deadlines, threats designed to make fighting back seem futile. But this time, the business owner had resources and support from day one. The foundation provided legal representation, helped document the landlord's discriminatory behavior, and connected the restaurant owner with other businesses that had faced similar challenges. The case was resolved in 4 months, with the landlord agreeing to honor the original lease terms and implement fair enforcement policies for all tenants. The restaurant not only survived but thrived, becoming a neighborhood institution that employed 15 people and anchored a small business district that attracted other entrepreneurs. Stories like that one reminded me why the fight against Jennifer Walsh had been worth every sleepless night, every anxious moment, every dollar spent on legal fees. But perhaps the most satisfying validation came in an unexpected form 2 years later. I received a call from a journalist working on a retrospective article about the Jennifer Walsh case and its impact on property management practices in Oregon. During our interview, she mentioned that she'd spoken with several other property managers about the changes in industry practices since Jennifer's conviction. One thing that kept coming up, the journalist said, was how your decision to fight back had changed the calculation for other people who might be tempted to abuse their authority. Multiple sources told me that the Jennifer Walsh case made it clear that small business owners weren't necessarily easy targets, and that documented evidence of misconduct could have serious consequences. That observation struck me as the most important outcome of the entire ordeal. Jennifer's downfall hadn't just protected my business, it had sent a message throughout the industry that abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated, and that victims of such abuse were willing and able to fight back. The ripple effects continued to spread in ways I never could have anticipated. Business schools began teaching case studies based on the Jennifer Walsh trial, focusing on the importance of ethical business practices and the long-term costs of prioritizing short-term gains over sustainable relationships. Property management companies implemented new training programs and oversight systems designed to prevent the kind of systematic fraud Jennifer had perpetrated. Tenant advocacy groups used our documentation methods as templates for helping other businesses protect themselves from predatory practices. Most importantly, the case became a model for how small businesses could successfully challenge much larger and more powerful adversaries through careful preparation, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to the truth. 10 years after Jennifer Walsh first listed my office space for sale, I stood in the penthouse conference room of Meridian Business Center, looking out over the Portland skyline as the sun set behind the mountains. The building now housed 43 businesses, employed over 200 people, and had a waiting list of companies wanting to join our community of ethical entrepreneurs. Evergreen Digital Solutions had grown into one of the Pacific Northwest's most respected marketing consultancies, with offices in 4 cities and a client roster that included Fortune 500 companies, alongside the small businesses that remained our passion. But the metrics that mattered most couldn't be measured in revenue or square footage. They were measured in the businesses that had survived because someone fought back against abusive power. In the property managers who thought twice before engaging in unethical practices because they knew there could be consequences. In the small business owners who learned that documenting everything and refusing to be intimidated could make the difference between survival and destruction. Jennifer Walsh had served her prison sentence and disappeared from Portland's business community. I occasionally wondered what had become of her, whether she'd learned anything from the consequences of her actions, whether she'd found a way to rebuild her life on a foundation of integrity rather than exploitation. But mostly I thought about the future rather than the past. About the businesses we'd help launch, the entrepreneurs we'd mentor, the precedents we'd set for how power should be used responsibly. The young woman who had once feared losing everything to a vindictive property manager had become someone who used her own power to protect others from similar threats. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge along the way. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I stopped by Maya's desk to thank her for staying late to help prepare for the next day's board meeting. She'd been with us for nearly a decade now, growing from a receptionist into our director of operations, and her loyalty during the darkest period of Jennifer's campaign had never been forgotten. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Maya said, looking up from the reports she was organizing. "That first morning when I showed you Jennifer's real estate listing, I was so scared that we were going to lose everything we'd worked for." I smiled, remembering that moment of absolute panic when the world seemed to be crashing down around us. "What changed your mind?" "Watching you decide to fight back instead of giving up," Maya replied. "That's when I knew we were going to be okay, no matter what happened." Her words reminded me that leadership wasn't just about making good business decisions or developing effective strategies. It was about choosing courage over fear, integrity over expedience, and long-term thinking over short-term comfort. Those choices had shaped not just my own career, but the careers of everyone who worked with us, the businesses that operated in our building, and the industry practices that had evolved in response to our refusal to accept abusive power. As I drove home through the city streets where I'd built my life and career, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a devastating phone call, and evolved into something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. Jennifer Walsh had intended to destroy my business to satisfy her own ego and greed. Instead, she'd catalyzed a transformation that made my business stronger, my community more resilient, and my industry more ethical. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't massive success. It was using that success to make sure others didn't have to face the same battles alone. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper with elegant calligraphy, nothing like the corporate communications that usually crossed my desk. It was addressed to Sarah Chen, founder and CEO, Evergreen Digital Solutions, and the return address made me pause. The Portland Business Leadership Institute was inviting me to speak at their annual conference about transforming adversity into industry change. 15 years had passed since Jennifer Walsh first tried to destroy my business, and the ripple effects of that battle continued to surprise me. What had started as a desperate fight to save my office space had evolved into something much larger, a career built on helping others navigate the treacherous waters of business conflicts and predatory practices. I set the invitation aside and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 20th floor of the tower we'd moved into 5 years earlier. The Meridian Business Center was visible across the river, still thriving under the ethical management principles we'd established after purchasing it. But our company had outgrown that space, necessitating a move to accommodate our team of over 100 employees spread across 6 offices throughout the Pacific Northwest. The view from my current office encompassed the entire downtown Portland skyline, a daily reminder of how far we'd traveled from those anxious days when a single phone call could threaten everything we'd built. But success, I'd learned, wasn't measured just in square footage or employee count. It was measured in the positive changes you created that outlasted your own involvement. Maya knocked on my door, now serving as my chief operating officer after working her way through every department in the company. Her loyalty during the Jennifer Walsh crisis had never been forgotten, and her strategic mind had become invaluable as we'd grown from a small consultancy into a regional powerhouse. The Portland Business Journal wants to do a follow-up interview about the Walsh case, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Apparently, there's been another property management fraud case in Seattle, and they want your perspective on industry reforms. I wasn't surprised. Despite the legal changes and professional oversight that had been implemented following Jennifer's conviction, the fundamental temptations that led to abuse of power hadn't disappeared. There would always be people willing to exploit authority for personal gain, which meant there would always be a need for others to stand up against such exploitation. Schedule it for next week, I said. But make sure they understand I want to focus on prevention and early detection, not just my personal story. Maya nodded, making a note in her tablet. Speaking of which, the Meridian Foundation has 3 new cases this month. A restaurant owner in Bend whose landlord is trying to triple his rent mid-lease. A tech startup in Eugene facing discriminatory treatment from their property manager, and a nonprofit in Salem dealing with fabricated building code violations. The Meridian Foundation had grown from a small legal aid fund into a comprehensive resource center for small businesses facing property-related conflicts. We'd helped over 200 companies navigate disputes that could have destroyed them, and our success rate in achieving favorable outcomes had attracted attention from business advocacy groups nationwide. Any that need my direct involvement? I asked. The Salem case has some similarities to what you faced with Jennifer, Maya replied. Systematic documentation of non-existent violations, suspicious timing with lease renewals, potential conflicts of interest with proposed buyers. The Foundation's legal team thinks your testimony about pattern recognition could be crucial. I felt the familiar mixture of determination and frustration that came with these cases. Each one represented someone's life work under attack, someone's dreams being weaponized for another person's profit. But it also represented an opportunity to prevent the kind of devastation that Jennifer had inflicted on so many businesses before I'd been able to stop her. Set up a meeting with their legal team, I said, and pull our documentation templates from the Walsh case. If the patterns are similar, we can probably accelerate their evidence-gathering process. That afternoon, I drove out to the small business district in southeast Portland, where Elena Rodriguez had rebuilt her company after Jennifer's fraud had destroyed her first venture. Elena's firm, Phoenix Business Recovery, now occupied a beautifully renovated historic building and employed 23 people, helping other businesses recover from setbacks and predatory practices. Elena greeted me in her lobby with the warm smile of someone who'd transformed personal trauma into professional purpose. Sarah, perfect timing. I just got off a call with a business owner in Vancouver, who's dealing with a property manager that sounds exactly like Jennifer Walsh. We settled in her conference room, surrounded by awards and testimonials from companies Phoenix had helped resurrect. Elena had become one of the region's most respected turnaround specialists, and her personal experience with business destruction gave her credibility that no MBA program could provide. "Tell me about the Vancouver case," I said, pulling out my notebook. "Family-owned restaurant, third generation, perfect lease compliance for 12 years, Elena began. New property management company takes over 6 months ago. Suddenly there are dozens of violations that never existed before. Fire code issues, health department complaints, noise violations from neighbors who claim they never complained. The pattern was depressingly familiar, but I was encouraged that the business owner had recognized it early enough to seek help." "How did they find you?" "Through the network we've built," Elena replied. "The restaurant owner's attorney had handled a case we consulted on last year, and she remembered our expertise with property management fraud. This was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of how our fight against Jennifer had evolved. What had started as an isolated battle had created a network of professionals who specialized in recognizing and combating predatory business practices. Attorneys, business consultants, property managers, and advocacy groups now shared information and resources in ways that made it much harder for someone like Jennifer to operate undetected." "What do they need from us?" I asked. "Documentation review and strategic guidance," Elena said. "They've been keeping records, but they need help organizing the evidence to show the pattern of harassment. And they need to understand their legal options before the situation escalates further." I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the Vancouver restaurant case, noting the subtle similarities to Jennifer's methods, while appreciating how much more quickly this case was being addressed. The business owner had recognized the warning signs within weeks rather than months, had started documenting everything immediately, and had sought expert help before the harassment campaign could gain momentum. This early intervention approach had become the gold standard for handling property management disputes, largely because the Jennifer Walsh case had provided a roadmap for both recognizing and responding to such tactics. That evening, I attended a networking event for women business owners, where I was scheduled to give a brief presentation about building resilience in challenging business environments. The audience included entrepreneurs at every stage, from recent college graduates with startup ideas to seasoned executives running established companies. During the Q&A session, a young woman raised her hand with a question that brought back vivid memories of my own early struggles. "I'm dealing with a landlord who seems to be looking for reasons to terminate my lease," she said, her voice betraying the stress she was under. "How do I know if I'm being paranoid, or if this is actually a pattern I should be worried about?" The question sparked nods of recognition throughout the audience, confirming that property-related business disputes remained a common challenge for entrepreneurs. "Trust your instincts, but document everything," I replied. "If something feels wrong, start keeping detailed records of every interaction, every inspection, every communication. Create a timeline and look for patterns. And don't wait until you're in crisis to seek advice. Early intervention is always more effective than damage control." After the event, several attendees approached me with their own stories of property management challenges, landlord disputes, and business conflicts that had escalated beyond what seemed reasonable. Each conversation reinforced my belief that Jennifer Walsh hadn't been an isolated case. She'd been part of a broader problem that required ongoing vigilance and systematic solutions. The next morning brought news that felt like a full-circle moment in the long journey that had started with Jennifer's attempt to destroy my business. Maya forwarded me an article from the Seattle Times about a property manager who'd been arrested for fraud in connection with systematic tenant harassment and illegal lease terminations. The property manager was Rebecca Martinez, and according to the article, she'd been using tactics nearly identical to Jennifer's falsified inspection reports, manufactured code violations, kickbacks from expedited property sales, and selective enforcement of lease terms to force out profitable tenants. But what made this case different was how quickly it had been detected and prosecuted. The investigation had taken only 8 months from initial complaint to arrest, compared to the years it had taken to build a case against Jennifer. The business owners affected by Martinez's fraud had received immediate support from advocacy groups, legal aid organizations, and consulting firms that specialized in property management disputes. The article specifically mentioned that the investigation had been accelerated by, quote, documentation methods and legal precedents established in similar cases, particularly the landmark Jennifer Walsh prosecution in Portland. I called Patricia Moore to share the news. Patricia had retired from active consulting but remained a trusted advisor and friend, someone who understood better than anyone how the Jennifer Walsh case had shaped my career and perspective. It's working, Patricia said after I'd read her the article. The systems and precedents you helped establish are protecting other business owners from going through what you experienced. But they're still out there, I replied, thinking about Rebecca Martinez and the other predatory property managers who hadn't been caught yet. The fundamental incentives that created Jennifer Walsh haven't changed. No, Patricia agreed, but the consequences have. People like Martinez know now that this behavior can lead to criminal prosecution, professional destruction, and civil liability. That changes the risk-benefit calculation. Patricia was right, but I also knew that deterrence only worked when potential perpetrators believed they might get caught. The real protection came from education, early detection, and rapid response, the kind of comprehensive approach we'd been building through the Meridian Foundation and similar organizations. That afternoon, I met with David Kim at our old coffee shop near the original Meridian Business Center. David had left Evergreen Digital Solutions 5 years earlier to start his own firm specializing in business crisis management. But we remained close friends and occasional collaborators. I've been thinking about your speaking invitation, David said over his usual cappuccino. The Portland Business Leadership Institute knows you'll draw a crowd, but I think they're missing the bigger opportunity. What do you mean? I asked. Your story isn't just about surviving a business attack, David explained. It's about how one person's decision to fight back can create institutional changes that protect thousands of other people. That's leadership at a scale most executives never achieve. David's observation resonated with something I'd been struggling to articulate about my own career trajectory. The business success, the growth, the profits, the recognition, felt almost secondary to the systemic changes that had emerged from our battle with Jennifer Walsh. I never set out to change an entire industry, I said. I just wanted to save my office space. That's what makes it authentic, David replied. You weren't trying to be a crusader or a reformer, you were just trying to protect what you'd built. But when you refused to be victimized, you created a template that other people could follow. 2 weeks later, I stood before an audience of 300 business leaders at the Portland Convention Center, preparing to deliver the keynote address that would synthesize 15 years of experience with business conflict, industry reform, and institutional change. The audience included CEOs, property managers, attorneys, small business owners, and policymakers, people whose decisions would shape the business environment for the next generation of entrepreneurs. The weight of that responsibility felt familiar. It was the same sense of obligation I'd felt when testifying in Jennifer's criminal trial, knowing that my words could influence how similar cases would be handled in the future. 15 years ago, I received a phone call that changed everything, I began, looking out at the attentive faces. A property manager had listed my office space for sale without telling me, and I thought I was facing a simple business dispute. I had no idea I was actually confronting a systematic fraud that was destroying small businesses throughout our region. I walked through the key elements of the Jennifer Walsh case, but focused on the lessons that had broader applications. The importance of documentation, the power of strategic thinking under pressure, the value of seeking expert advice early, and the responsibility that comes with surviving challenges that destroy others. The most important thing I learned wasn't about real estate or property management, I said as I approached the conclusion of my presentation. It was about the ripple effects of choosing to fight back versus choosing to give up. When you refuse to be victimized, you don't just protect yourself. You create precedents and systems that protect everyone who comes after you. The standing ovation that followed felt different from the polite applause I'd received at other speaking events. This audience understood the business implications of what I was describing, and they recognized the ongoing relevance of these lessons in their own professional challenges. During the reception afterward, I was approached by Margaret Stevens, the daughter of Robert Stevens, who had taken over management of his real estate portfolio after his retirement. She was in her 40s, with the confident bearing of someone who'd inherited significant responsibility and taken it seriously. "Ms. Chen, I wanted to thank you personally," Margaret said. "The reforms you inspired in property management practices saved my father's business reputation, and probably millions of dollars in litigation costs." "How so?" I asked. "After the Jennifer Walsh case, we implemented comprehensive oversight systems for all our property managers," Margaret explained. "Last year, those systems caught a manager in Tacoma who was engaging in similar fraud. We were able to terminate her employment and correct the problems before any businesses were seriously damaged. This was exactly the kind of institutional change that made the entire ordeal with Jennifer feel worthwhile. The systems and precedents we'd established weren't just protecting individual businesses, they were changing how entire organizations approached property management and tenant relations. More importantly," Margaret continued, "the case changed how we think about our responsibilities to tenants. We realize now that stable, ethical tenant relationships are more valuable than quick turnovers and maximum rent extraction." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my career had taken since that terrifying morning when Maya had shown me Jennifer's real estate listing. I'd started as someone trying to save her own business and had somehow become someone whose influence extended throughout an entire industry. But the most satisfying aspect wasn't the professional recognition or the business success. It was the knowledge that young entrepreneurs facing their first major crisis now had resources and support systems that hadn't existed 15 years ago. The Meridian Foundation had grown into a regional network with chapters in 6 states. The documentation methods we'd developed had been adopted by business schools and advocacy organizations. The legal precedents established in Jennifer's prosecution had been cited in dozens of similar cases. Most importantly, the culture around property management and tenant relations had shifted toward greater transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior. Jennifer Walsh was scheduled to be released from prison next month after serving her full sentence. I occasionally wondered whether she'd learned anything from the consequences of her actions, whether she'd found a way to rebuild her life on a foundation of integrity rather than exploitation. But mostly, I thought about the future, about the businesses we'd help protect, the entrepreneurs we'd mentor, the systems we'd continue to refine to make predatory practices less profitable and more dangerous for the people who attempted them. The young woman who had once faced the potential destruction of everything she'd built had become someone who used her experience and resources to ensure others didn't have to fight such battles alone. That transformation felt like the most meaningful success of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.